So this video is going to be a companion video to the 3D skin painting video that I'm redoing. The one that I did previously got mangled by YouTube and gradually started emitting large screeching noises. Unfortunately, I'm sorry to those of you that had to sit through that. Anyways, some Google search terms that I'd like you to just start off with is UV photo sun damage, and then blue veins face, and then blue veins forehead will help you see some of the visible veins that are there and some of the visible sun damage that happens, exactly what's happening underneath the skin. Some of that will be visible above and some of it will not be, but it's all kind of there. It's subtle. It's something that's information that's just there, and that's what we'll be doing with trying to make realistic skin, is giving the illusion of some of these things that lie underneath the skin are things that are just subtly visible, just barely there, and they add a sense of realism. And the cool thing about that is that our eyes are sensitive enough to perceive them, but not always on a fully conscious level. So sometimes you can bring even a layer down to maybe, I don't know, between 2 and 5%, where you really don't see it all that much, and yet it's there just enough for us to pick up, and it's there, we just see it. Anyways, the last one here is normal petechia. These a lot of the images related to this will show up as kind of freaky, simply because people will get these heavy rashes that will cause a lot of these to appear, but these actually show up in small amounts all over our bodies and begin to show up more and more as we get older. We'll get, 1 or 2 here and there, and they're really just not a whole lot of them. They're just kind of burst blood vessels that just over time happen. Maybe you have like a really hot summer or something like that, and you're sweating your butt off, and maybe 1 or 2 will pop up here and there. So these are just basically red dots that I'll often add to it and add sort of details. So we'll take a look at some of these things. Let's start off with the vein system. I didn't mean to maximize that. There we go. So in yellow here I have the edges of sort of the bone system, where they kind of exist just for reference purposes. This blue vein here actually probably should follow the edge of the bone a little bit more. I'll probably change that a little bit later. And here I have a layer over top which is red, which is a muscle that goes across here, and it actually covers part of this vein itself. So just so that you're aware that those are there, and I'm going to get rid of those. And we'll just look at these veins. Now remember, you can pause this video at any time to take a look at this and kind of reference them. Now, just like fingerprints, the locations of the veins in general are in the same place, but the absolute position of them is highly varied across different people. There is a vein that goes through the front of the forehead, this middle of the forehead here, and sometimes it splits higher up and sometimes it splits lower down. And so some people will have like a visible V on their forehead, and others will have this big line, and then just before the hairline it branches off. So beware of that. We have a series of veins that go around the eye cavity, sometimes over the top of the lid or through the lid. There's often a vein pattern that actually goes through here. We'll look at an image of that a little bit later. Across the bridge of the nose, sometimes it communicates across, sometimes it goes upwards, but it's usually a thicker kind of vein, and this is an area where it's fairly visible. So here it's visible, here it's visible, here it's visible, over here it's visible. These are things that typically show up. A lot of these other ones don't show up nearly as much. These guys, and here, like I mentioned, there's one that's covered, but it's also deeper in the skin, so less chance of seeing it, but knowing that it's there, knowing that it exists is something. This stuff can get a little bit close, but part of it I think goes underneath the ear and behind, and parts of it may be visible. What's really important is that you have a look at your reference. So again, veins of forehead will show this up. Veins of the head sometimes will show these 3 that branch off, and again, they branch in different areas. Sometimes that one will branch off here and then two over here. Sometimes they branch off higher. It will depend on your reference. The source of these veins is not as important. They kind of dig right in there and then go down and underneath the collarbone, but they're less likely to be visible there. And these are just some of the main veins. And this is just one vein system that I'm bringing up, but just so that you're aware that it exists there. One more slow rotation. And there you have it. Now on top of this, we also have a whole series of other veins that go through everything, and if you do notice stuff pop out, you can always go in and adjust that. So I put in a very low opacity additional vein layer, which in there, and this main set of veins here I probably won't show as intense as they currently are. This is something that I will show in small amounts, again just kind of sitting underneath, and areas where I may actually erase some of it so that it's not as visible. It's just kind of knowing that they're there and making that part of your system. But in addition to this, if you wanted to do something more like a freaky zombie character or some kind of evil character or whatever, knowing where these veins are sometimes helps with showing them up as being this kind of creepy character, those veins being more visible. So just something to think about. Going in here, we'll talk about the general idea that we have the zones of the face. So if we look at this, we have the golden zone, the red zone, and the blue zone. And the golden zone is typically bone. The red zone is areas where blood and close veins and stuff like that may be more visible. And then, of course, the areas with follicles would typically have this blue region. And so on a male, this is going to be more prominent than on a female, but that's the basic location of it. Now, if we look at the actual image, however, we'll notice that this idea of a specific zone, like this is yellow, this is red, this is blue, is not necessarily realistic. If we want to try and paint things so that they appear normal, we have to look at our references and pay attention to their skin type. Now, this is not just about whether or not they're tanned or not. What this is about is different people have different amounts of redness in different regions of the face. So redness really kind of comes through. It's not just say, okay, I'm just going to put all the red here and then I'm done. We have to pay more attention to what's present here. So this area is an area that can be less red than it is in this particular example. It can be far more red and in fact go to a dark purple color if the person is perhaps like a heavy drinker throughout their life. That often causes damage to this, and sometimes even changes the shape of it. It actually starts to like bulge out and get really gross looking. Other people just get kind of like a purple color. So this is one of those things that can be different on different people. You notice that it's kind of clamping off right about here, and that's because this is a bony region and the bone is actually fairly close. And then of course we have, as I mentioned, there's a vein that goes up and across through here. I'm noticing a desaturation, sort of a blueness just a little bit in there. Some redness across the eyebrow, top of the lid, bottom of the lid. You can see some of the blue in there. See red through these bottom areas here. So pay attention to your reference. This is definitely not a blue zone. You know, there's a little bit of a blueness here and here, but not so much everywhere else. So this is more like this. It's more along the ideas of having, you know, it break up in different regions. So pay attention to your reference, and that will help you determine where you should be putting that. So on a male, again, maybe not yellow, but there's some other factors to this. One of the other factors is the idea of the color of their hair. If a person has more of a blonde color of hair, it may be that the colors that are represented here will not be as desaturated as everywhere else. Why blue zone? Why blue at all? Well, I've got right here, I've got an inverse of this image. So I just took it and pressed Control I and set it over top. And I've got it down to 50%. Let's take it all the way to the top here, just set to color mode. And we can see that the inverse is blue, aside from the greenish tones that are here, or marine tones that are coming from the more red areas. But the general idea of the skin tone is this bluish color. Blue, being the inverse, when taken down to roughly about 50%, desaturates the image, so it desaturates it in that area. How it's perceived in this is as blue. This is because we have warmer colors here against a neutral color, or neutral value, where it's just desaturated gray. Now it looks blue, but in reality it's basically mid-gray. It's completely desaturated. And in different areas it'll have a little bit more saturation. Some of them will actually appear somewhat blue, but for the most part it is just gray. So even though we perceive it as being blue, just remember that gray is actually what we're looking at here, and that's the reason why we're using blue as our inverse color to desaturate. That's what it's doing. In these examples above, I just quickly sketched out an eye, and this area right here, the area underneath the eye, is probably the thinnest region of skin. And what we'll end up seeing is, in some cases, when someone's really tired, or they get older, or they've had damage like a black eye and stuff like that, these areas will turn darker, sometimes a bit more purple in color, and can even swell up a little bit. So depending on how much tan, I guess, they have to their skin, will determine how reddish this will appear. In some people with slightly darker tan skin, you'll notice that they will be darker in color in these regions, but not necessarily like a purple color. And that's because the melanin prevents some of the red color from coming through, but we'll talk more about that in a little bit. For someone who is well rested and youthful, often cases it will be less present there, and things like the veins may be more visible depending how translucent their skin is. There will still always be some level of redness or purpleness in the lower and upper lid closest to the eye, and of course in the actual fold in there. Let's talk about skin tone. So I've got right here, let's turn that on, a adjusted version of this, and it's just been set to multiply. And really all it is it's been mildly darkened, and its color has been set, let's just change this to normal, to a sort of brownish color. So it's just a copy of the same thing, and added a single color tone. So it's not got all the like red regions, blue regions, etc. It's just that, and then the eyes have been cut out so that they are not affected. Let's set this to multiply. You can see it darkens the skin in the way that we'd expect it to. Now melanin comes in multiple flavors, so let's talk about that for a moment. We have, I just got my notes here, wrong ones. We have eumelanin, which is black or brown, and the brown variety makes our blonde color of hair, and is also responsible for the skin tone and things like freckles. The black version is responsible usually for black hair and shows up in the face far less. Then we have pheomelanin, which is red, and it gives us red hair, red lips, and the red nipples. And it will show up in a few other areas that are a bit more red in color. So what we're seeing here is the color of the melanin, which has more of a brownish tinge to it, is showing up, and it's giving, in the lighter areas, more of a I suppose, more of a yellowish tinge to it. The result of this is it balances out, not just because of the darkness, but also because of the contrasting color, the redness and the visibility of the redness. A person with much darker skin tone will have a harder time being seen when they're blushing. The lighter the skin tone, the more visible it becomes. So the red areas will appear less intense in terms of the red qualities. And this is just the nature of the purpose of what melanin is supposed to do. And what it's supposed to do is block light. It's preventing some of that light from getting through to damage the skin and other things underneath. So it's doing its job in pretty much both directions. The light's not getting through, so therefore it's not bouncing off the red stuff and then coming back out of the skin and giving us that color. It's just not making it through. As we go ahead and adjust this, we can adjust from a regular skin tone upwards and add a gradual amount of tan, giving someone sort of, an perhaps like olive skin color, and upwards into darker and darker skin tones. And you can see the differences in there, where the red may be more visible in an olive skin tone, and then as we go up, it becomes less and less visible. So again, all this was just a kind of brownish color. You can see it's kind of in the orangey range, and maybe 2/3 in saturation is kind of the color range that I'm using for that. And this can be applied wholesale to the overall thing. In this particular case, I just color adjusted this so that I would maintain my highlights, because if I apply this as multiply and this whole thing is dark, I lose my highlights, and I just wanted to keep them present. But in the case of painting a flat skin color, you're not looking to do that, but you will produce areas that will be lighter in order to encourage less coverage of that. So either you can just paint the color and then just put less in those areas, or you can paint a lighter value in those areas in order to decrease that. So if you're painting in 3D. So that will give you your differing skin tone. So the final thing that I'm just going to quickly discuss here are some of the other elements that are visible. As I said, the petechia that are there, and the petechia are just little red dots. So this is an example of that on someone's forehead. This is across an eyelid, an upper eyelid. You can see visible veins and kind of the systems connecting to each other and going all throughout. And of course freckles, which are the result of our body trying to respond with this, and yet not having nearly as many melanocytes to produce it. And so this pathetic attempt is what us poor fair-skinned people discover when we go out in the sun. So it's just kind of broken up in a pattern, and it's just that same kind of brownish color, and you could apply it as a multiply layer, and it will show up over top of everything else. Now this can be applied in a much lower opacity, and that's where looking at that other thing, which was this UV photo sun damage, comes in, where it's down to maybe 3% visibility for the freckles. Not enough for us to perceive directly, but it is there, and it's something that will add I guess a sense of realness to your final paint. So it may feel like a waste, but sometimes really subtle details make a lot of difference. Okay, so one other feature to mention with regards to some of this is male versus female colors. Again, this color zone here being more yellow in this particular case, this is to the reference, but it's also that this is a female face. For males, it will show up more. And what's also interesting is that because it's coming from follicles, in the case where we go ahead and darken this, So if I set that back to multiply, oh, wrong layer, set that to normal, set that to multiply. This area here is a little bit more saturated than perhaps it needs to be if this were a male. So I would probably desaturate this area the same as I would with regards to a pale-skinned version. This is because follicles do not exist underneath the skin so much as they produce things that come out of the skin, which is what's causing the desaturation overall. So the areas where hair exists more prominently, these things will still be like that. So more towards the edge of the this area here, underneath here, and then throughout this region on most males, the whole area will tend to go somewhat desaturated. Another feature is that female skin tends to be a little bit more translucent, a little bit paler, even from between the male and female. They did a study a while back where they took a non-gender specific image. They basically blended a bunch of male and female images together to get something that wasn't really specific to one gender or another. And then all they did was doing a contrast change to the image, and one appeared male and one appeared female. The one that had the more paler features, the greater contrast between those areas, appeared to be feminine, and the ones that had the darker, more ruddier kind of complexion ended up being male. So consider that in your choices as well. However, making someone pale of skin can also lead to ideas of making a person feel as though perhaps they're older. Adding more contrast and color can also do that as well, making them seem sickly or a vampire or whatever. So again, it's going to be down to your reference, but this is some of the basic theory you should be thinking of behind the scenes that should explain what's going on. And in the next video, we will go through a more practical approach of applying this directly onto a 3D model.